What happened to the music? Tanya, was that you playing?
Okay, wait for the prompt. Good luck, everyone.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chuck Roberts. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Advisory Board for the Metro New York chapter of the National Black MBAs, and again, welcome. We have an exciting event for you tonight. Probably have a lot more than the hour and 15 minutes we've allotted to get done, but we're going to make a great attempt to get as much as we can in. There's just so much to be said about the subject of nutrition. So we narrowed it down to nutrition for women. That might help. This is March National Nutrition Month, as well as Women's History Month. So we put those two together, form this presentation. This may be our third or fourth session in the series of nutritional literacy. And we're very proud of that because we know we're helping the community we serve. I'm not going to say too much, but I do need to do the homework of thanking our sponsors. In this case, because in fact, we are blessed with having great sponsors. We have Nasdaq, Estee Lauder, MBAchic. We appreciate them being around and supporting our efforts. And it's all about making sure that we're giving out a clear message to the community we serve, that we're trying to help all of our members. I'm going to say that you have two of the best people in the area of nutrition in here tonight. They together, although they don't look like it, have thousands of years of experience in the field of nutrition. And I'm speaking of Caroline Austin Matheson and Constance Brown Riggs. I got the name right. And we have a tremendous host. We have Miss Tanya Colon, who I got to say that I've known her such a long time. I feel like she's one of the members of the family. Also, let me thank Mr. Marvin Vasquez for all the work and marketing work he did to get this event out in front of the public, and his team at MBMBAA. I just can't say enough for how excited I am about what we're going to do tonight. It may be just the beginning of the series, but it's okay. We're going in the right direction. Without further ado, I'm going to ask you to look at the monitor here, because now we're going to have Ms. Tanya Colon and her team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Chuck. And I am extremely excited for this conversation. When we talk about better nutrition for women, this is a topic that is broad, but is much needed. There's a lot of layers in there, depending on a woman and her life cycle, where she is in that chapter of her life. Nutrition is never one size fits all, which we'll discuss today. And since we have so much to cover, rather than me take on another 2 minutes of an intro, I am going to step into introducing our esteemed panel today, which will be able to help us dig deep into what is best for us when we're curating our health. Our first panel guest is Dr. Caroline Austin Matheson, is a certified family nurse practitioner who has over 20 years of experience practicing in cardiology, educating patients on cardiovascular health and nutrition. Caroline is passionate about working with individuals to improve their cardiovascular health and nutritional literacy, especially in the minority community. Caroline earned her doctorate in nursing practice from Yale University, where she focused on primary prevention and cardio-oncology, identifying risk factors and initiating early preventive treatment plans for patients undergoing chemotherapy. Currently, Caroline practices as a nurse practitioner and is a clinical program manager of the Cardiovascular Institute within the Mount Sinai Health System. Caroline enjoys running, meditation, dancing, and reading for relaxation. Our second guest is no stranger to our healthcare series. She helped to kick off the first one. It's Constance Brown Riggs, an award-winning registered dietitian, nutritionist, certified diabetes care and education specialist, is the author of several diabetes books, 2 of which received the Hermé Gold Creative Awards: Living Well with Diabetes, 14-Day Devotional, and the Diabetes Guide for Enjoying Foods of the World. Constance is passionate about creating opportunities to spread the word about health and nutrition and developing educational tools which shorten the cultural distance between patients and caregivers. As president and owner of CBR Nutrition Enterprises, Constance provides nutrition counseling services to consumers and healthcare professionals, as well as consultation services to industry, fitness centers, churches, and other corporate and community organizations. Constance enjoys spending time with her grandchildren, weight training, jogging, alternatively walking, running, and singing as well. And I'll open it up with a question for both. When we talk about nutrition, again, it's usually a broad stroke. And I think most people, when they think nutrition, they automatically think of it in the context of losing weight. But we know, especially during the last 2 years with this journey with COVID, that nutrition is more than just losing weight. It's the cornerstone, it's a centerpiece to building immunity, strong brain health, and gut health. Do either one of you want to take that question first and step into that a little bit more?
All right, I'll start. Basically, in terms of COVID and immunity, brain health, everything that you mentioned, it all, in a sense, boils down to our preparation at early age. Okay, so when I'm thinking in terms of this, the title of this presentation, Better Nutrition for Women. Okay, so if the woman starts early in her life cycle, building good nutrition, eating healthy, we know that that translates into keeping her family healthy. Research shows it's more likely that the family would be eating healthy as well. And we know with that good foundation, it actually helps to lessen the chance of poor outcomes should there be any type of illness. So we know, as you said, when COVID came, we saw a lot of disparities. We see a lot of people with chronic disease that actually succumbed to COVID, more so than those that had a good foundation, that didn't have diabetes, that didn't have hypertension, that weren't obese. They actually fared a lot better. So it's, you know, what we do from early on is extremely important in terms of laying down that good foundation so that if we should fall ill, we have a lot to fight with and we strengthen the body. We nourish the body all along.
Nourishing being the big key for sure. Caroline, there are a bevy of like food app. There's so many apps right now. I think the big thing is there's so much noise out there. People get overwhelmed with what it is that they can do to kind of curate something that makes sense for them. So there's a bunch of food tracking apps that we hear of every single day, different tools, different approaches. Again, can feel from the layperson can feel very overwhelming, especially if they're just starting their nutrition journey now versus having had those pillars before. Are there some that you recommend or you've utilized with some of your patients that you feel really just simplify it for a lot of people, especially if they have an overwhelming schedule?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So the food tracking app, I've used a few and they're all very helpful. Basically, it gives you an opportunity to log your daily food intake. So tracking makes it easier to see what your food choices are, and it helps with the calorie counting. It also tracks the types of food. It can tell you what you like, what you're not eating off. not eating enough of, and it also identifies the daily required caloric intake. I've used in the past something called Lose It, but it's not just about losing weight. While it's a weight loss management tool, it also, based on your height and weight, gives you the amount of calories for the day. MyFitnessPal is also something that's very helpful, but in the most recent months or years, the MyPlate calorie counter is one of the most useful apps. And I like this app because it's based on the current dietary guidelines. The website of the US government, it has tools, it has resources for shopping, recipes, and it also helps you to choose nutritious foods. It helps when you go shopping, deciding how many fruits and vegetables are going to be great for the week. So it's something worth looking at, and it basically focuses on not restricting as much as eating a wholesome diet. So it has fruits, veggies, grains, protein, and low fat or fat-free dairy products. So of all the apps, I mean, there are a lot, but I would say MyPlate Calorie Counter app is the best. It also, if there's a picture when you go to the website that I find very helpful, and I show this to patients, basically half of your plate is going to be fruits and vegetables. The other 0.25% is going to be your grains, like perhaps brown rice or quinoa, and the other portion would be your protein, lean protein. So it's a very useful app.
It sounds amazing. Anything that can simplify that journey, I think, and actually just teach people intuitively how to measure out the plate and using that as a tool, I think is very powerful. Constance, my next question is, in this world, there's so many like diet fads of keto, vegan, and intermittent fasting is one that we hear a lot about, especially depending on where you are in your life cycle, right? Maybe you're premenopausal, going into menopause soon. What are your thoughts or opinions on utilizing intermittent fasting? Is it good for people? Is it just for a small season as a bridge? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. It's, as everything, depends on the individual. And I would say more so a season, as you put it, kind of a bridge. It may be a start to get on to a better way of eating or to kind of start the weight loss process. There's a couple of different ways of doing intermittent fasting. And the important thing for people to understand is it is not a weight loss diet per se, and it concentrates more on when to eat as opposed to what to eat. So it's very easy to say, I'm doing intermittent fasting, and on your fed days, to overeat and to eat, all the wrong foods. So that should be first and foremost, that it doesn't mean you have, free for all on the days that you are eating. A couple of the most common or frequently used, one would be just the alternate day. So every other day you would fast. And then that's for a 24-hour window. There's also a modified alternate day fasting where you would take in about 25% of your usual intake on the fasting days. And then on the fed days, about 25% of your usual intake on the fed days, the days that you're eating. And on the fasting days, of course, you would fast. I'm getting it all backwards. Fasting is when you're going to eat a small amount, the 25% of your usual. That's your modified fasting. So every other day you would do that. There's also another one that is called 5 and 2. With that one, you're eating 500 calories 2 days out of the week. And so it's not every single day that you have to be concerned with that. And then last is actually time restricted. And time restricted is probably, I'd say, the most popular one. And that's where you're eating with an 8-hour window and then fasting for the remainder. So if you look at a 24-hour day, that might mean 16 hours of actual fasting, 8 hours of eating. Typically, the fasting, the majority of it is going to occur overnight. And so it's not quite as difficult as it sounds. But when I'm working with individuals, someone that, insists they want to try it, we do modified. It's not 16 hours. It may be a 10-hour window for eating and 14-hour fasting. The important thing is, as I said, individuals with any type of diabetes or, they're on certain medications, they have to be very careful. They may not be a candidate for intermittent fasting and any one of the protocols that I mentioned. So all of that always has to be taken into consideration. It's always based on the individual. And as you said, there is no one shoe that fits all. So, those are the protocols, but I would encourage anyone interested to sit with their healthcare provider, see a registered dietitian for help before trying to do that on your own.
Thank you for breaking that down so beautifully, because I think people get confused, and the way marketing kind of sets it up is to have it almost be a free-for-all, right? You start for one day and then you can have anything you want for the other two. And we know that's a dangerous little combination there, especially when you're feeling hungry. Caroline, what has been your biggest lesson on nutrition, and how has your journey with what you do for a living? I know a lot of it is you're passionate about educating the minority communities. How has your job also shifted your view in nutrition as well?
Wow, thank you. That's a great question. So my experience as a certified family nurse practitioner working with everyone, including male, female, and a lot of the minority population, depending on where I'm at the time, what I've found is that proper nutrition for me is really eating to live. And that's a phrase that was coined by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. I read that book a couple of years ago. And that kind of stuck in my head and kind of helped me to make choices and helped me to also teach patients how you can eat a wholesome diet, but making choices that you actually can live and combat your disease. So I provided care in different settings, such as the cardiac catheterization procedure lab, where patients receive a stent for their blockages after a heart attack. We put them in medications. You provide education about diet, medication compliance and instructions are provided, and patients leave. And even after the heart attack, many times people are able to change just for maybe a month because they were scared. But I want to say the most impactful experience for me, and something that I think made me really realize how important the diet, if you coach and work with people, that you can sometimes affect change, was working with patients who've had heart transplant. So I would provide education to patients and family before they undergo heart transplant. And in this role, I had an opportunity to get donor offers. I would travel with the surgeon for procurement of the heart, come back, and you can imagine I'm very committed to these patients. I'm working with them. They got a heart. We're excited. Now, the difference between the patients that I saw inpatient, whether it's in the ICU, the cath lab, or a regular med-surg floor, is I speak with them, I give them instructions, and we let them go. As I get more experience in my profession, I realize how important it is to send them home with someone like Connie, right? Have them, refer them to see a registered dietitian, but that's not always done. They get out there, you give them sheets of papers and they go. But what was impactful was working with the post-transplant patients. It was very tiring, but I had an opportunity to manage them. So I would see them weekly after they would come in for their heart biopsy of their transplant, blood work, you tweak their medication, counsel them, then it goes to biweekly, monthly. And if we had to see them more frequently, we would bring them in. And we were available 24 hours. It was pretty tiring. If I'm not available for my patient, a colleague is on call. And we found that these patients who were able to work with had better outcome. So despite all of the advanced treatment, including the heart transplant, or as advanced that the medication goes, the lifestyle modification remained a fundamental important thing to control blood pressure, blood sugar, and decrease cardiovascular disease. And in these patients, actually decrease the risk of rejection. So anecdotally, my patients who changed their lifestyle with a lot of work and a lot of family support did better. They felt better. They had less rejection. And even though a lot of them were on steroids, to prevent rejection, many of them didn't develop diabetes. And on the other hand, those patients who went back to their old habits, sadly, some were smoking, poor nutrition, not exercising, they struggled more and ultimately didn't have good outcome. And so in addition to me seeing this, there are evidence in the New England Journal of Medicine and many other reputable journals out there that really confirm that lifestyle modification can decrease the risk of chronic diseases. And I think the behavior change could prevent up to 80% of heart disease, stroke, which is very common in the African-American community, type 2 diabetes, and 40% of cancer. And so I take this experience and I realize the lack of education in some of our neighborhoods. And so I do a lot of community events and always try to educate the people in the minority group. And I happen to work in a place where we also do a lot of pre-COVID, we did a lot of community work. So that really gave me an opportunity to impact change. And as you mentioned before, better nutrition, it doesn't just make you feel better. It decreases inflammation. It builds strong immune system. It improves your health overall. And so that's why I think my experience has really proven this to me. I've seen it firsthand. Thank you.
I love a lot of the points you brought up because the idea of eating to live takes this pressure off restriction, and it becomes more of a lifestyle mindset, heart set change that you want to live your life in the best possible health instead of waiting for a life altering event to happen. And then you're being forced to wake up at that point, because the body will normally give signals throughout your lifetime. And most people, because we're all human, divinely just human beings at the same time, we wait for worst case scenario, right? We'll have warning signs along the way and keep through it. And I think one of the important messages that you're both speaking to today and Chuck brought up earlier is, we have mentors and coaches for a lot of aspects of our lives, but very often we don't invest in ourselves as much as we should. We don't pour as much into our own individual cups, especially as women, leading the family. We're normally leading that health decision for our family, but we tend to put our health sort of in the back burner. So I think all the points being brought up today are amazing. Constance, my next question is for you, because we talk about that restrictive mindset, right? The minute someone, you sit down with a potential patient and you're telling them this is your food regimen, and I know that's not your approach, but I'm just talking about it in broad strokes. People are going to rebel a little bit on, now I'm restricted. Automatically their world, like the walls are going to kind of come closing in, and they're internally there's a little bit of that rebellious kind of like, no, I can't do this off the bat. So for someone who's overwhelmed and now they're looking at a food regimen as not eating to live, but it's going to keep them from feeling like they're living, what are some basic principles you have to help them like overcome some of that so that they can still have a balanced diet and maybe ease in or phase into what's right for them over time?
Well, that's the key word, ease in, phase in. Oftentimes, people think that it has to be everything at once, 360-degree turn, just, turn over the way that they've been eating for years. And we know that changing eating habits is extremely difficult. And so for that individual that's overwhelmed, feels they can't do it, there's no way, we start off slow. And together, we work together and determine, well, what is it that you feel you could do? What is it that you feel you could manage? And I give them a couple of options. One of the things that Caroline mentioned was the plate. It's called My Plate. Some people call it just the plate method. And that's a very easy way to build a balanced plate, to start eating healthy without overhauling everything at once. And for most people, they find that palatable. So even if they're eating, I'll say, or use my always, the example I use is soul food. So even if they're eating soul food, if they put it on the plate in those proportions, they're getting less fat, they're getting less sodium, they're not missing out on the foods that they've grown accustomed to. And then over time, we try to change the plate a bit. So rather than having fried chicken as your quarter of the plate for the protein, let's try to make it baked chicken. Let's try to have more fish throughout the week. So slowly we change the eating habits. I'm reminded of my brother. I just had a conversation with him the other day, and he went to see a nutritionist through his doctor. He was lucky. And he told the nutritionist everything that she was giving him were foods that he didn't eat. So he said, how am I going to follow this? How am I supposed to follow this? I said, well, she should have asked you what you typically eat. I don't know why everything is getting dark in here for some reason. I don't know if it's my screen or not. But in any case, that's one of the first things as a nutritionist, as a registered dietitian that I do. I want to know, what do you typically eat? And let's see how we can work with that, with your current eating habits, and slowly change them. But again, just to rephrase, the plate method is excellent. Half the plate, non-starchy vegetables, fruit and vegetables actually would be in the half plate. The other half, divided in half again, a quarter is going to be the healthy protein, ideally, and a quarter would be reserved for starchy vegetables, plant foods. Well, vegetables are plant, so beans and that type of thing would go in that section. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I love to go back to what Caroline just finished saying as well. I love her approach, and she just brings home that point so well, that it can't be one and done. One visit with an educator to change eating habits is not going to work. Just as she said, you give them all these papers, they go home and put the papers on the side, and that's the end of it. Or maybe they follow it for a month. But to change your eating habits for the long haul, it's got to be slow, gradual changes. That's what works best.
Thank you for that. And of course, there's so many emotional factors that got them to eat that way in the first place, right? So there's all that the unconditioning that has to happen. That was a lifetime of conditioning that got them there in the first place. Caroline, I wanted to ask you this question, because we talk about a noisy world, but when you also look at food labeling, it's kind of like chaotic as well, especially if you're a mom and you're looking at non-GMO versus GMO. And we're not going to dive deep into that at all today, but hidden sugars, et cetera. So in this world where we've already established it's noisy on different stages and fronts, what does healthy eating look like for you? And then how do you translate that to your patients in the most simplest form?
Yeah, thank you. So healthy eating for me looks basically as regular meals, right? So even if you are deciding to work with a nutritionist or your physician to do some kind of intermittent fasting, I think for consistently eating a regular meal, for some people this may include breakfast, for some it may not. So I find that, again, as I speak with different individuals, not everyone is accustomed to having breakfast. So whatever your schedule is, like Constance says, find out what do you usually eat and see how we can fit it in, and encouraging a balanced meal. So another thing for healthy eating is appropriate snacking. So you mentioned, I guess, stress level, the frame of mind. So you want to assess to see if you're eating for socialization, right? Are you eating just because you're with friends, and are you eating because you're hungry? So that's another thing I usually tell people. If you eat when you're hungry versus for comfort, that's usually a form of healthy eating. Disordered eating would be, fasting that's not, if it's not done correctly, purging, binging, grazing, all, if you're just eating because you're bored, I would suggest going for a walk, right? Healthy protein, that you mentioned, like high biological value protein. So egg whites, if you're concerned about, depending on where you are. So this is just for People who are well, you can have eggs, but if you're someone watching your cholesterol, maybe egg whites are better. Pulses, for example, green peas can be helpful. Soy that's not processed, like edamame or tofu, lean meats. And another thing about eating healthy is really minimizing processed food, right? Cured meats, high sodium meats, cold cuts, pigtail, pig feet, depending on your culture. Codfish is something that's, popular in my culture. So, and it's not like you can't really have these things. I think if we eat well for most of the time, then you can basically get away with doing this maybe occasionally, because you want to still enjoy the foods that you love or that's a part of your culture. And I would say consuming fish at least twice a week is also healthy, but we have to be careful when we choosing fish because of mercury in fish. For example, swordfish, we want to limit consumption of that. So I know salmon or shrimp, if someone is not allergic to shellfish, those are good choices. Healthy carbs, you want to choose carbs at a low glycemic index. So avoid things that are refined, for example, cakes and cookies. But, if you're going to have a fruit like an apple, that's better. High fiber whole grains because we need fibers. And vegetables as much as you can, like steam the raw vegetable will help you to fill up. So these are some of the things that we can eat and minimize processed foods, breads, refined grains. Again, doesn't mean you'll never have bread, but it's if you eat for 90% of the time, you're eating well. And if you choose to have something on the weekend, you go out for brunch with your friends, you want to have a pancake, that's fine. Also minimize sodium. High blood pressure is very prevalent in the minority community. So it's very important to watch the sodium. If you're going to have canned goods, choose things that you can rinse. You want to also fats, right? So the salmon is a good fat, almonds a good fat, avocado, olive oil. But something that I had to work with over the years is almonds is like something that helps me with stress. So you can overeat almonds. So you have to watch the portion, maybe portion it out to prevent you from overeating it. And also another important thing I just wanted to mention is sufficient hydration, right? So if you can take in like 8 to 10 servings of 8-ounce water daily, because water makes up like 60% of the body. And we lose a lot of water depending on where you live, the time of the year, urine and perspiration. So I think it's important to also stay hydrated. And I know I did a talk recently and someone was saying, well, you can be overhydrated. And that is true. But I think the most of us are not able to drink too much water to become overhydrated. A lot of time, if someone has an underlying medical condition, is when they can drink a lot of water and sodium can drop, or sometimes if someone has like a mental disorder. But I don't think a lot of just people without underlying issues will overhydrate because the water fills you up. So that's what I think, just eating a balanced diet.
Great advice. And I think a lot of us, if anything, are dehydrated because we hydrate more with other things like coffee and other liquids, even sparkling water, because we think that that's our cheat into and sparkling water is fine, but make sure you're actually drinking water. First and foremost. I had a friend of mine that would always say when she went to the supermarket, she would avoid the middle aisles and just literally go around the border of a supermarket. And they're laid out the same, actually, when you think about it, no matter where you are.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So when in doubt, just use that little roadmap in the supermarket. Constance, I have a quick question on low fat and low carb diets. Are they safe for women? Because that's another one of those fads that will come in and out.
Yeah. And they can be safe. By the same token, they can cause a problem. So getting back to one thing that Caroline said is in terms of what carbs they're choosing would be more important than the quantity. So staying away from the process, the cookies, cakes, candy, jelly, jams, that is better. Also, if they're going on a low carb diet and they have, for an example, diabetes, this would be an example of where it could cause a lot of problems. They go on a low carb diet, they're on medication for diabetes, which actually will help to bring glucose levels down. they're following this low carb diet, they can actually have dangerously low blood glucose as a result. So if they're going to follow, again, any type of diet, low fat, low carb, they need to do that in consultation with a professional who can look and evaluate what medication they're on, what conditions they may or may not have. In terms of the general population, it would be staying away from the sugar sweetened beverages and all of those other concentrated sweets that I named. Though that's the best approach. If you're eating healthy, you don't have to worry about going on low carb. It's the quality of carb more so than the quantity of carb. With low fat, sometimes we have to put people on low fat diets depending on what's going on in their health. With Caroline, I'm sure she has a lot of people that are, she's educating them on reducing the amount of fat because of their cardiovascular condition and so on. In general, most people are thinking about low fat, low carb for weight loss. And low carb, low fat, either one, what ends up happening, and with most of these fad diets, is it's really all about an energy deficit, energy restriction, cutting back on calories. If you cut back on fat, you're cutting back on calories. You cut back on carb, you're cutting back on calories. If you did alternate day fasting or time restricted fasting, if you have a smaller window, you're eating less. It's all about creating that energy deficit and doing that in a healthy way. So there's nothing really magic about low carb or low fat from the weight loss perspective. So with all of this, it's almost like, I feel like I'm giving people bad news, but the good news is it's all about healthy eating. And it's not a matter of one fad diet or the other. The other thing that happens is people generally take it to the extreme. So they're going to go extremely low carb. They're looking at ketogenic diet, for an example. And that too can be extremely dangerous if not done under the care of a health professional, and particularly if you may have some type of chronic disease. So with proper instruction, people with diabetes, for an example, may be put on ketogenic diets, but that's under supervision. And it does help. It will help with weight loss and so on. But again, we're looking at health professionals to guide the way, not just to do that type of extreme diet on your own.
I love that you bring up that point, because ketogenic is sort of another one of those conversations that we see everywhere in the media. I had a friend who had type 1 diabetes. It did help him quite a bit, but again, it was supervised closely for him to reverse some things there, or to have him have better health there. But I love that the main message with what you're saying is consistency, right? So eliminate the idea of it being fad. This is more lifestyle, consistency, nourishing the body more instead of having to consistently pivot to these little fads sessions because you're not disciplined to. It's not about discipline. It's just making a choice on how you want to fuel your body over time.
And kind of, accentuating the positive as opposed to thinking of the negative. What you can't have, accentuate the positive. Think about what you want to eat more of. Are you getting sufficient amounts of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and so on? So work that way, accentuating the positive, forget about the negative, what you can't have.
Love it. Caroline, my next question is for you. It sounds basic, but I'm thinking it more in terms of genetics a little bit as well, right? Because, just depending culturally or based on your DNA or your family health history, certain things are prevalent there, whether that's heart disease or diabetes. In your experience, in changing diet, exercise, smoking, or drinking alcohol, does it help someone to avoid chronic disease if it's still kind of there on a genetic level anyway?
Yeah.
I know it's a tricky kind of question.
No, it's actually a very good question. It's something that I had to, learn over the years. And I do have these conversations with patients and or other individuals. And because first of all, I start off with cardiovascular disease because that's where, I spend a lot of time working with people. So cardiovascular disease, that involves the heart and blood vessels, right? So this is going to go for patients with coronary artery disease, angina, heart attack, those who, other disease would be like stroke, heart failure, hypertensive heart disease, abnormal heart rhythm. So for example, I would use myself as an example. So my paternal grandmother had multiple strokes. So while I was in nursing school, at a very young age, I learned that this can be, genetically I'm predisposed with the hypertension, the history of stroke, but I could actually do my best to change the outcome, right? So while cardiovascular disease remains the number one killer, and stroke accounts for like 80% of death in male and 75 in female, a lot of times we're not really thinking that, oh, I can change it. It's like, oh, it's in my genes and I'm just going to, do what I can. But there's also an estimated 53% of people who die from this because of dietary risk factors. So I think I read someplace else again where they said your genes load the gun, but the environment fires the trigger, right? So here I am. I know that I'm already predisposed or, speaking to people who are. So what can I do to do my best to change my outcome, right? So tobacco use, right? So if you're smoking, you want to stop smoking. Physical activity, you do your best to get your exercising at least 30 minutes a day, at least, a minimum of 3 times a week. You choose an exercise that's fun, something that you like, not necessarily something no pain, no gain, because you won't really go back to the gym. So whether it's walking, dancing, whatever, you enjoy, the diet, and this is what we're talking about today, like really eating a healthy diet. You want to decrease inflammation. And the best way to decrease inflammation in the body is by consuming more fruits and vegetables. Preventative services, like I put that as a part of the lifestyle modification, because we get so busy, and it's important to have your physical so you know where you are based on your family history and your genetic predisposition. And just making these changes, not only do we prevent heart disease, and I talk about so much stroke, you actually can decrease the risk of cancer, and diabetes. So I certainly believe from what I've experienced and the studies and what Connie's saying about just if you change your lifestyle, modify your lifestyle, you can actually make some changes you basically can alter your genes that way, and maybe not develop diabetes as early or not get a stroke that someone in your family had. So it's very important to make lifestyle changes to do your best to have a better outcome.
No, I love that, because a lot of the times the genes can stay as sleepers. It's what you said, the environment will activate it or fast track it, right? So instead of it being in your 80s, you just fast tracked it to your 40s or 50s because you were kind of like, oh, well, it doesn't matter anyway. It's prevalent all over my family. And your point is that should be motivation to really look at it mindfully, to say, how do I live a good life, still eat to live, but be mindful of the fact that these are markers, gene markers within my family history that I need to be aware of, because they're within my body and they can be awakened. Yeah, I really, really love that, which leads me to, it's sort of a follow-up question, and it could be for both actually, because I don't think as women, we know what these markers are that we should be looking for. For instance, like with just cholesterol, like HDL, like these simple things that we can get overwhelmed with. Like what are some, let's start with cholesterol first. When we're talking about HDL, what does that mean? And when is it too high for anyone really?
Okay, so I can start with that. So basically the HDL, people refer to that as the good cholesterol, right? So a desirable HDL should be somewhere around 60. And for women, if you're less than 50, that's concerning. But we don't look just at that. You also look at your total cholesterol. So your total cholesterol should be less than 200. Your LDL, if you don't have diabetes or coronary artery disease, should be less than 100. And so these are important markers. And when we talk about knowing your numbers, then this is, if you follow up with your physician and you find out that, okay, my LDL is 126, my HDL is 60, your doctor, and say your total cholesterol is maybe 220, your doctor may say to you then, okay, so we need to start watching your cholesterol. Let's make some changes. So before you even get to needing medication, this is where you can start making small changes. So again, the LDL, that's considered, people say bad cholesterol, but it's the one that you want to be less than 100. And if you're a diabetic or have underlying heart disease, it should be like less than 70. And the total cholesterol, which you kind of can get a broad number, but the total cholesterol by itself doesn't matter. It's good to have the breakdown and see where you are. So I would say HDL of 60 or above, we consider that cardioprotective. But again, it depends on the individual looking at everything for that person.
Is there other indicators or markers that people, women should, because we're talking about women today, that we should be looking at just overall outside of just HDL?
Oh yeah, so so basically we do a lot of things. We say know your numbers. So in addition to your total cholesterol, another thing that really matters is your blood pressure. So, and the number is getting lower and lower actually. When I first graduated, it was like less than 140 over 90. So now normal blood pressure should really be less than 120 over 80. And if someone has a blood pressure greater than, say, 120 to 129, that's already considered elevated. If the diastolic is also over 80, and that's where you start not necessarily needing medication, but you want to be monitored closely. And this is where we can start making changes. Blood sugar, your fasting blood sugar should be less than 99. This too, because of the I would say type 2 diabetes is more like a pandemic right now. So when I first, like years ago, it was less than 126. Now it's tighter. It should be less than 99. So someone with 100 to 125 fasting blood sugar is considered already pre-diabetic. Something else, hemoglobin A1C, should be less than 5.7. So these are all things that, you can, when you have your physical, you want to basically ask your doctor, like if you remember the things to remember, total cholesterol, or you could just say your cholesterol, the doctor should give you your breakdown, your blood pressure, your blood sugar. Another important thing is BMI. So the normal BMI should be 18 to 24.9. Now, this it's calculated based on your age, your height, and weight. So I just use my calculator. You could also go to like calculator.net to figure out what your BMI is. So if your BMI is say 25 to 29, you're considered overweight. If the BMI is over 30, you know that you really have to, if you want to prevent, getting heart disease, stroke, you really have to make some changes. If it's over 30, that's concerning. And I think also we have to remember, so when you look at a chart and it says what your BMI should be, like when I look at the chart and I tell this to patients I'm talking to or individuals, based on my body, I don't necessarily go, I know I cannot be 18, so knowing your body type, and you can work with your registered dietitian, your physician, your primary care physician to figure out where is okay, right? So maybe for someone like me, I'll be okay with being 23, but I'll try not to tip it over and go to like 26, because then it's becoming concerning where I'm overweight. So again, the numbers would be your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and BMI. I would say next time you go to the doctor, write them down, get to know them. And because these are things that it's important, if we know the numbers, that will motivate us. When we don't want to go for a walk, then you will say to yourself, you know what? I know that my hemoglobin A1C is 6. I can change this by, start moving and changing my diet.
So
Yeah,
can I just,
sometimes. Oh, sorry.
listening to Caroline, when you get all of those numbers, because sometimes, the patient is going to look at one number and focus in on that. But you as the healthcare provider you're doing a full assessment. You're evaluating everything, right?
Yes.
So I think that's important for them to hear. And then also that the BMI, you also have to factor in if someone is, for an example, a bodybuilder, where they've got a lot more lean tissue on the body, the BMI is not going to give a true representation of that individual's health status. So that's, I just wanted to bring that up. That's why the healthcare provider is going to look and evaluate the total picture, not just that one number. What else is going on with that individual as well?
Yes, thank you.
And then as nutritionists, you both are looking at it to see where's the best space with that client, what that journey, how you're going to tailor that journey for them, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
We touched upon this a little bit earlier, and it's the differences in nutritional value based on race, culture, by age. How do you accomplish it? And I know, Constance, this is something that you've written your book on, specifically with discussions on soul food, but it depends, for any culture. Do either one of you want to expand on ways to accomplish, nutritional value by race, culture, et cetera?
There's not too many things that would be different in terms of chronic disease. There are some. For an example, if we are looking at even A1C that Caroline mentioned, the level is different in an African American, even broken down this way, from African American, someone that was born and raised maybe in the South, as compared to someone who was born and raised in the Caribbean or someone from the Caribbean. There's slight variances that they're seeing now. So that they're just picking up in research. More broadly, they do know that in general, African Americans have a lot. If you look at the A1C and then compare that to the actual blood glucose, it's going to be a lot higher for that individual based on the A1C. So they may be misdiagnosed. They may be diagnosed with diabetes before they actually have diabetes, looking at that parameter. But that's something that the healthcare provider, would be more aware of. I get a little nervous with that, because if the patient or the consumer out there hears that and the doctor does tell them they have diabetes, generally, people go into denial anyway. I couldn't have diabetes. It must be the dozen donuts that I ate last night. My blood sugar can't be that high, so I don't want to give them another tool to use as a form, to deny what's really going on. But that is something more that the healthcare provider would look at. And in terms of disease, even looking at the BMI, that would be evaluated also based on individuals' race. If we're looking at waist circumference, for an example, Asians run into problems in terms of health, greater risk for heart disease, for diabetes, and so on, at a lower threshold than the average American. So there are some indicators that we look at and interpret it based on that individual's race.
My next question is for both of you, but I'll start with Caroline first. Why is the topic of nutrition so important for both of you? And whether or not there's some journey or a story, of impact early on in your life cycle that really brought you to this stage. So Caroline, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So why is it important to me? I think it goes back to my experience, my working with patients, and my own family history, and just it's important because I would say the science tells us, right, that with nutrition, with better nutrition consistency, you can actually live longer. You can decrease inflammation in the body. You can have better gut health. That Constant probably work with a lot of people on this. So it's really important because it's the one thing that if you eat well and make good choices, you can actually live longer, or you're doing your best to live longer. And I think just seeing what happens in the community and with patients, and seeing the different changes, people getting, people rarely, sometimes people can end up not needing to be on their hypertension medication. This happens really rarely. And that's the other thing to point out, that it's not usually all or nothing. So it's either you make the small changes that we're talking about, modify your lifestyle as much as you can to get this change. Or there's some people who decide, okay, now that I've experienced this, I'm going to now not eat poorly. I'm going to start exercising more. So even though it's not an all or nothing, but sometimes it's easier when you decide to make the change and do it all at once. You see not faster, but the results are more noticeable earlier. So it's just, so my decision to, and the reason why this is important is really just over the years working with patients and friends and family, and seeing that consistent nutrition for most of the time and exercising can make a world of difference.
And so for me, it was basically family history. My specialty is diabetes, and there's a lot of diabetes in my family. And growing up, I would see, aunts, uncles, amputations. My grandfather lost his vision as a result of diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what got me interested in the field of diabetes. And of course, along with that is the nutritional aspect, and how what you're eating can make an extreme difference in the outcomes for individuals with diabetes. And then similar to Caroline, what I found looking at educational materials for individuals, it really didn't speak to the cultural aspect. So a lot of the food pyramids and, it wasn't my plate at the time when I started. It was, I think, the 4 food groups or whatever, but it didn't have ethnic foods included in much of the literature. So that's one of the reasons that I focused, on African Americans and looking at soul food and how that could impact individuals' health, how changing it could make a difference, and working with the individuals that way. So it's in the blood for me to work with diabetes. As I said, I've seen it all my life. And I've seen, as I phrase often, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's not all bad, it's not all ugly. There's a lot of good outcome that I have seen as well.
Thank you for that. It's prevalent on both sides of my family as well, diabetes is. Someone asked an interesting, it's a good question from the audience. I thought we should circle it in. They're asking, how does one find a dietitian or nutritionist? But taking it a step further would be probably like, how do you find the right, is there like a rule of thumb to find one that's right for you? And that's for both of you guys, but Constance, you can take it first, and then we'll shift it over to Caroline.
There's a website, eatright.org. And if you go to that website, I believe it's up in the right-hand corner, it will say find a registered dietitian or something to that effect. And there's a listing. So you would just put in your zip code, and it will give you a list of registered dietitian nutritionists, what their specialty is, who they work with. Some may be pediatrics, that's their specialty. Others will be teenagers, others will be adults. So, it would give you the complete breakdown. If you have diabetes, then you want to go to someone who is knowledgeable in diabetes, and they would have that as their specialty. So that's a starting point. Many that are in private practice would actually give you a 15-minute consultation or so that you can see if they're right for you. I always encourage people, you want to explore. If you're working with someone and you find out it's not a good fit, you can divorce them, and find someone who you can work with, that you relate to, that, is showing empathy and interest in you and helping you work through whatever the problem is, and that they ask you questions about the foods that you typically eat, and they're not just shoving papers in your face. So.
Love that advice. Caroline, is there, for you, what advice would you give someone?
So advice, I think eatright.org is a good website to find the registered dietitian. And I think just to echo what Connie said, it's finding the right dietitian is like finding the right therapist, right? So you meet the person, you interview the person, and you may have the first session. And again, if they're giving you a list of what to eat, like Connie's brother, then this person may not be right for you. For example, someone like me with an ethnic background, Caribbean, I need someone who is knowledgeable enough to look at the list of things that I eat and say, okay, you may not like collard greens, but you can eat callaloo. You want to find someone that provides individualized care. And I think that's what I would say, no matter if you Google or you go to a website, or for us in the hospitals, we do refer, and a few of our dietitians may be private or finding a coach, but you want to find someone that is right for you, that is going to be providing individualized care.
And someone's asking, what's a helpful way to increase iron and B12s?
Okay, so iron would be eating more animal protein, if you will. Chicken, fish, you'll have iron there naturally. Well, I shouldn't say naturally because you don't know that, but red meat has the highest source of iron, but we don't want a lot of red meat in the diet. So, you have a little conundrum there. I would say if you're going to eat red meat, make sure that it's lean. And also there are plant-based sources, beans, kidney beans, almost any type of bean is going to give you iron. Spinach, dark leafy green vegetables are good sources of iron. If you're looking at the vegetables for your source of iron, be sure to combine it with vitamin C. So if you have tomato with the beans, or you have an orange right after you're eating that meal, that plate of beans or the spinach, that will actually help the body to absorb the iron more efficiently. And the B12 also comes pretty much from the same sources. Your primary source of B12 is going to be animal protein. You don't really get a significant amount of B12 in plant-based proteins.
Great advice. I have a quick question. How has COVID-19 shifted the scope of nutrition and our perception of it? And how have you seen that theme into, or how has it shown up in your practice with your individual patients?
Caroline, want to take that? Or I'll start.
I can start.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So I don't think in my practice, I don't think COVID-19 has affected the nutrition portion. The one thing I would say is that I know that during the pandemic, there were a lot of different myths about what to eat or not to eat, to prevent, or if you have COVID, drinking certain teas. Again, it depends on your culture. But I would want to reinforce that what we learned from that was that those people who were less healthy were the people that we lost more in the beginning of the pandemic. People who had certain comorbidities, chronic illness such as obesity, hypertension, diabetes, we will always be at risk of severe illness, whether it's the the coronavirus or other viruses that come. So I think nutrition plays a role where if you, again, eat healthy for at least 80 to 90% of the time and try to maintain your weight, keep your blood pressure down, control your blood sugar, then you won't be as ill, because eating well and following the dietary guidelines became more evident during the pandemic, because a lot of the early death that we learned about was from, we heard that all these people had other comorbidities, while someone who is well or on the healthier spectrum may become ill but not end up dying.
One aspect is from my the people that I see, and in general, was looking at early on in the pandemic, especially, was more to do with procuring food. Okay, so shopping and learning how to buy in bulk so that you don't have to go to the supermarket as frequently. You know, how to prepare, to utilize frozen foods. You know, many people want fresh, but frozen would hold up longer. So again, you don't have to go to the stores frequently. Looking at canned vegetables and things that were available. We know early on the shelves did not have everything. So it was, excuse me, more of that type of nutrition intervention that I was working with. And then of course, for that person with diabetes, to make sure that they're continuing to follow their meal plan going through the pandemic. But it was more food preparation, shopping, if you're ordering in, what to look for and how to maintain safety from the food perspective.
Great feedback. We had some guests actually send in some questions prior to the webinar beginning. Someone asked, should bacon be forbidden in general from a healthy diet? Caroline or Constance, which any one of you can take it.
Sorry, I think maybe we both can answer, because it depends on how much you love bacon. Again, I would say it's moderation, right? So when it comes to, it's loaded with saturated fat. So it's not something that you eat all the time. If it's something that you're consuming daily, I would say that I would suggest doing it in moderation, perhaps decreasing it to once a week, or every 2 weeks if you can. But again, this is just general information, because if the person has something like hypertension, I would say to avoid it as much as you can, right? Because of the sodium content. If this is a person with congestive heart failure, that's going to be retaining water, this is going to put you in the hospital. I would say to try to avoid it as much as you can. But again, eating 80 to 90% of the time healthy. And if you indulge, it's not like this is the end of the world. So then you have bacon this morning, then the rest of the day, you have to be very careful with your salt intake and go back to eating a healthy, wholesome food. That's what I would say.
And a serving of bacon is not a pound. It's not the whole package. And that's where, with most things, where the problem comes in. People talk about bacon, they're not having 2 slices. They want the whole package, the whole half pound, whatever it is. So that's where the biggest problem comes in. At the same token, I would say there are no redeeming qualities to bacon, but just as Carolyn said, if they really insist, then it's to show them how to fit it in and to break it down just as I did. Let them see 2 slices of bacon, 10 grams of fat. If everything else is balanced, the rest of the time, it's not going to make that much of a difference. So it's really, again, goes back to that quantity. Everybody wants the big portion.
It's always the quantity thing, but I think you make great points. When you don't feel restricted and you can melt it in a way that flows, then you don't really feel this need to overindulge, right? Because you've already shifted the mindset that it's not something you can't have. You can have it almost in a treat form. So you can have it as part of your life. It just doesn't have to be, to your point, a pound of it. It can be just brought in. We're going to be wrapping up soon. I think I wanted to both ask you individually if you wanted as we're closing this out today, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations on this where we can dive deeper into different channels of this, what would be the one thing you would want if they took just one or two things from this whole conversation today? What would you want them to leave with? And I'll start with you, Constance, and then we can shift it over to Caroline.
The most important thing is eating a balanced diet and thinking, just to go back to the whole title, is nutrition, looking at women, nutrition for women, and to recognize that what you eat has an impact on all of those around you, whether you're a mom or you're not a mom, you're, living at home with your mom. Women generally take the lead. This is generally take the lead in terms of health and nutrition. And so it starts with you. That's the important thing. I think one of the questions had to do with being overwhelmed and not being able to follow a rigid diet. Recognize that you don't have to. Take a look at my plate, as Carolyn and I both mentioned, and it gives you tons of information. You bite off a little piece. Start with the plate method. Start with the plate method, feeding your family based on the plate method. At dinner, half the plate, the fruits and vegetables. The other half, a quarter, is going to be starchy vegetables, grains, pasta, that type of thing would be a quarter of the plate. And the other quarter is going to be the healthy protein, lean meat, fish, chicken, and that you're going to be well on your way. And then to go back to, I think, a point that Tanya mentioned is going to be the fluid. So put a glass of water next to that plate and you're well on your way. That's a starting point. That's easy. That's what I'd like you to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So as Connie so eloquently said, women, we are the ones who sustain a healthy family unit. So what would I want to say today? So the takeaway is I have to remind you, the heart disease is still the #1 killer for women in the United States. 1 in 3 women die from heart disease each year. So it's very important to follow exactly what Connie said there. The importance of eating whole foods, practicing good mental hygiene. It's very important to just start off with just meditating. If you can, even if you can't do it before going to work, but getting 2 minutes in your office or wherever, just sit and close your eyes. And your mind may wander, but that's okay. That happens to everyone. But just take some time to really decrease stress, because stress kills. And being active is a first step. So follow the dietary instructions that Connie said. It's not anything that's going to be restricting too much. It's just moderation, and get active and find ways to decrease your level of stress, because better nutrition is not about diet. It's better control, it's better choices, and in the long run, better overall health. Thank you.
Thank you both for the beautiful gems that you gave us today and for all that you do to educate our communities. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm so grateful that we were able to put this together. But before we end, we have Kimberly Ennis, who's part of the Greater New York Black Nurses Association, who has some final words for us today.
First and foremost, Caroline and Constance, thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge on this topic. It is extremely important, and I learned a lot. The content you shared was extremely valuable and truly helped to raise awareness around nutrition during National Nutrition Month. And I love a phrase that you use, Caroline. I'll always remember that. Your genes load the gun, but your environment fires the gun. So that was a really something that I'll always remember. Tanya, thank you so much for being an amazing moderator and maneuvering all the questions. You did an excellent job. Chuck and Marvin, thank you for putting this program together. And most important, a big thanks to all our attendees across all the platforms, Zoom, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I truly hope the information today that was given from Caroline and Constance really help you take a big step towards improving nutrition. And thanks again to our sponsors, Estee Lauder, Nasdaq, and MBAchic, the Greater New York City Black Nurses Association, and the Metro New York MBA chapter. Truly look forward to creating more programs and doing future partnerships to bring educational programs your way. You could, again, view this webinar on YouTube, and I want you guys to have a wonderful evening, and I hope you learned as much as I did today. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.